Hi, I'm Matt Difanis, broker-owner of RE/MAX Realty Associates with offices in Champaign, Mahomet, and Monticello. Coming to you today with a spring buyer's update. How can you tell it's my spring update? Because I'm dressed like an Easter egg. So every year I have buyer clients who are surprised to find out how early our market really picks up, but also how early the season ends. So I want to give you some information so you know if you're hitting our market this year, what lies ahead and what's going on right now. To sort of guide this conversation, I've prepared a graph that shows you month-by-month activity for 2018. Now, every year is slightly different, but 2018 was fairly typical, as I expect that 2019 will be as well, in terms of when in the year our sales activity happens. And so what this graph shows you is it has two different lines. One of those shows you pending sales by month. That means listings that went from active to under contract, or reflecting when it is buyers signed contracts to buy, when they made purchase decisions. And then the second line, the white line, shows by month when the transactions closed. So since you have to be under contract before you can close, it's no surprise to see that trend line peaked earlier for pending sales than it did for closed sales. So let's talk about that for a minute and what that means if you are a buyer this year. So when you think about what drives most of our schedule, most mainstream buyer schedules, it is the fact that lease calendars around here tend to run from July 31st to July 31st. The other variable that is a similar time frame is school registration deadlines. So those are two big variables that tend to drive when people are trying to move. If you're getting out of a lease that ends July 31st, you typically want to be closing no later than a week or two before that, mid to late July. And since it typically takes, on the short end, 30 days, but more commonly 45 days from the time you get an offer accepted to the time you're closing, you work backward, and a late July closing means you have to be under contract no later than the middle of June or earlier to be able to accommodate that before the end of July closing deadline. So if you think about that, and then you also think about the fact that if you find the right place earlier in the season, or if you have a seller who's anxious to get closed sooner than July, remember, if you're a buyer, you can close anytime in May, and your first mortgage payment won't be due until July 1st. So it makes it relatively easy and affordable for buyers to have overlapping possession or to go ahead and get into their new place, even if they've still got a month or two left on their existing lease. So then how does that look in the real world? Well, we will see, as that trend line shows, that buyers really start rushing the market in March. You saw that the pending sales went up sharply in the month of March. In fact, last year they actually peaked for the year in March, but it was really more of a plateau. So they ramped way up from the off-season, deep off-season winter months, peaked in March, but were more or less a plateau running all the way through April, May. June was down some, and then July, August dropped off substantially. That's very typical. So if you're a buyer client this year and you're in the market now, keep in mind peak season will run for another couple of months. A lot of the sellers who are going to put houses on the market haven't done it yet and are going to be putting houses on the market through the entirety of the months of April, May, and we still see a fair number of new listings in June. On my seller update, you'll hear me talk about how that freaks me out if a seller waits that long to put a house on the market, but you'll continue to see inventory filtering onto the market. Now, one of the other things to keep in mind is if you're somebody who's in an affordable price range, consider the way the laws of supply and demand are going to work with your situation. If you're in our marketplace under, say, $250,000, chances are you're dealing with a segment that has a completely fixed supply. That is, you cannot build any new homes to add to that market segment for under that price. So the supply is already fixed. You're not ever going to see more houses added. And yet, in those affordable market segments in particular, there's always a strong demand every year from buyers looking for affordable housing. Now, I tend to be very low pressure with my buyer clients. I'm a low pressure guy in general, but that doesn't mean that market externalities won't put you in a relatively high pressure situation. And that can freak some people out depending on how you're wired, but it's not the end of the world, and it certainly is not something you cannot plan for and be ready for. And so what does that look like? Well, every year I certainly see clients looking in really popular market segments who end up in bidding wars and lose a couple of houses before they eventually get one. And that can be really frustrating. I also see folks who know if they're prepped, they know it's game on. They know that they can depend upon me or whoever is representing you as a buyer's agent to be able to run market comps so you have a good sense of what price is fair, so you know that you're ready to go in, treat it as game on, and make sure that you act decisively and quickly. And you can also sweeten how attractive your offer is by doing things like having a local pre-approval with a local lender and potentially waiving a home inspection contingency. You'll want to talk to me individually before you would do that, but if the sellers have provided a recent reputable home inspection report and you're in a multiple offer situation, waiving a home inspection contingency may be a way to add certainty to the deal that makes your offer get the edge over 2 or 3 others that may be competing. I just had a 4-way multiple offer situation that was decided largely on that basis. One of those offerers was willing to waive an inspection contingency. So there's lots of tools, lots of levers to pull. If your timing is flexible, but you're in that mainstream price range, you may find that simply waiting until the season dies down and you're not competing against as many buyers may cause the market to tilt into your favor. Fewer listings will be coming on the market once we get past May, but you'll also find that there's some post-season deals. You'll have sellers every year, I see it happen. Buyer clients ask, well, what's the matter with this one that it's been on the market for so long? And a lot of times there's nothing wrong with the property other than the fact that it was priced too high during peak season, and they joined the too little too late club by doing a price reduction too late in the year to affect a sale that they would have had at that price if they had just been earlier. So if you're flexible on timing, if you're living with relatives, if you've got a month-to-month lease, and if you don't find the perfect property during peak season, watch for post-season deals. Now, if you were a higher-end buyer, and in this market, in the Champaign-Urbana metro area, that's north of $400,000, if you're a higher-end buyer, you're going to find during peak season and other times of the year, the market is tilted a little bit more in your favor as a buyer. And that's because the supply is not inherently fixed. If you're a high-end buyer, you've got options for pre-owned properties that are competing for your attention, as well as builder spec houses. Those are the houses that builders build on speculation, hoping to find a buyer, and they go ahead and complete them, as well as builders doing custom builds, that is, signing a contract to build a house for a particular client. So you'll find that in those higher end price ranges, because the supply is not inherently fixed, and because there's a lot fewer buyers when you get north of $400,000, you may find that those market dynamics work a little bit more in your favor. So of course, everyone's situation is different. Every year works a little bit differently, but I hope if you're a buyer this year in the Champaign-Urbana market, this update gives you some sense of how things tend to go around here. I welcome the opportunity to chat with you individually, as do all of the members of my team. Do not hesitate to reach out to me via text, telephone call, or email. I would welcome the chance to work with you. And that concludes my spring buyers update. Again, my name is Matt Difanis, broker owner of RE/MAX Realty Associates.